I'd like to bring up Judge Andrew King to present and talk through his candidacy for the Ohio Supreme Court. Andrew King. Thanks, man. There you go.
Well, good evening. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. As was mentioned, my name is Andrew King. I'm a Court of Appeals judge, and I'm running for the Ohio Supreme Court. Can you hear me all right? All right. So the reason I'm running is I believe we need to put a constitutional conservative on the bench. As was mentioned, currently we have a Democrat in that spot. And we need to retire Jennifer Brunner, make it a 7-0 Republican majority, well, 7-0 Republican Supreme Court, not even just a majority. So that's the reason I'm running. So I wanted to take a moment and talk to you about judicial philosophy. Because at the end of the day, that is the thing that you are getting when you elect a judge. We can't come up to you and promise you we're going to vote a certain way. We can't tell you we're going to do a certain thing. Because if you think about it, you don't want us to do that. If you are coming in front of us, you want that judge to be fair, impartial, and apply the law as it is. You don't want that judge to prejudge your case and say, hey, your last name is Trump, or you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, I'm for you or against you. So judicial philosophy is what you're getting with the judge. So with me, I'm a constitutional conservative. That means I'm an originalist, and I'm a textualist. So you may ask yourself, well, what does that mean? Sometimes people throw that word around, and they don't give you any explanation. So, and I'll try not to give it to the point where your eyes glaze over. But being an originalist means when you look at the Constitution, you take the Constitution's text, and you apply it. So that doesn't mean like, well, you don't like the Second Amendment or you don't like the way that this particular amendment's phrased. You apply it as the framers put it in the Constitution. And then if you have to look any further than the text, you look at the history and tradition that informs that. So as was mentioned, I mean, America is a great country. Our constitutional order is superb and above everyone else in the world. I truly believe that. We are blessed. We are ordained to be a mercy to the world. And our Constitution is what that is grounded in. So when folks want to just wander away and say, well, it's a living document. It can mean whatever I want it to say. Well, that's not a Constitution. That's just you as the judge saying, well, I like this particular outcome. I like this particular thing. And I think it's so important that I'm going to impose it upon everybody else. So, one of the ways that we should be constrained as judges when we're looking at things like the Constitution is to say, well, what did the folks that use these words, what did they think and mean? When they said like the right to bear arms, what did they mean by that? And that's what we should do as judges, is give that meaning to the Constitution, not obfuscate it and put our own meaning in there. Now, beyond like when we're looking at the Constitution, judges, in my view, and how I approach legislation, is textualist. And you think, well, this is already sounding super boring. Now we're talking about more words. But it's really what we do as judges. We read all day long, and we write all day long. So words should mean things to us. And if they don't, I think you're in the wrong business, frankly. So being a textualist means that you send legislators down to Columbus, or you send good folks to D.C., and you ask them to write laws for you. And those folks take the time through committees, two houses, the governor or president signs off on it. Everybody looks at that and sort of has an idea of what they think those words mean. Years later, when it comes in front of us as judges, and now we got two parties arguing, it isn't our opportunity to go in with our red pen and rewrite that. That's not our constitutional order. When you want your legislators to write the law, you want your legislators to write the law. You don't want politicians and judges. You don't want legislators in robes. So being a textualist means that when you apply the same thing as I said with the Constitution, you apply the words that they put right there on the paper. And you'd think that that's easy. I mean, everything I'm explaining to you, in my view, is our constitutional order. It's the way things ought to be. And as you heard, and as you've seen, plenty of judges don't view it that way. I saw something on the, I think it was X the other day, where somebody was bemoaning the fact that the Supreme Court was affirming Trump in like 80-some% of the cases. But the district courts, the lower courts, the trial courts, were only agreeing with Trump in something like 25% of the cases. And in their mind, like, this was demonstrating something was wrong. And it's like, no, like, if the Superior Court is telling you this is how this should work, you should be following them as lower court judges. That's what I have to do when Justice Hawkins and 6 other justices tell me what to do. So it's the same way when the legislatures tell you as judges, this is how the law should work. You have to apply it. So the reason I share this with you is we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Justice Hawkins talked about how at one point this question came up about bail and whether you can consider public safety. If you would have asked me that 10 years ago, would anyone ever question that? No. I mean, there's been so many issues lately that it boggles the mind that this has even been an issue that courts wade into. So what you always want is a judge that is going to follow that philosophy. And that philosophy is the guiding star to how the judge rules on a case. And if you have a judge that doesn't have a philosophy, then it's a coin flip. Whatever the judge is thinking that day or feeling that day, or whoever the litigants are in front of them, or whatever they think about the outcome, and that's not predictability. That's not applying the law as the legislature wrote it. That's not applying the Constitution as it was put. So, I've heard some people say from time to time, and we've got 6 seats. Sort of any Republican will do, and if we lose the seat, so what? Well, I think you heard Justice Hawkins talk about it a little bit. We don't know what the future is going to bring. We had a Republican Chief Justice, and you'll forgive me, her name was Maureen O'Connor, and she was a Republican. Elected as a Republican, held herself as a Republican, but she was the deciding vote in several cases and sided with the Democrats on 4-3 decisions. So being a Republican is not enough. We don't know what the future is going to hold. We don't know when one justice might be that swing vote. So I submit to you that you want somebody that has a coherent judicial philosophy. And more than that, I think you want someone that's been a conservative, that's had that philosophy for more than a minute. I mean, election time is a convenient time to suddenly find beliefs that you didn't have before. We've seen that, and not just in judicial races, but other races. So, for my part, when I was in law school, I went to Capital Law School. I was a night student, put myself through law school. One of the first things I did was join the Federalist Society. And that's the preeminent conservative, libertarian legal movement. It's Justice Scalia and some other folks like him started that organization to counter the liberal progressive bias in our law schools. And I've been a proud member of that organization. I'm now the faculty advisor for Capital. And I think that is an important thing that I've been involved in that organization for 20-some years. It's not just, I'd like to be on the Supreme Court. I'm conservative, trust me. Likewise, I've been a concealed carry holder for pretty much from the beginning, been involved in those organizations like the NRA and Buckeye Firearms, was rated, I was endorsed in my last race by Buckeye Firearms. And I share this with you because it's evidence that I am who I say that I am. I'm not just up here trying to sell you a bill of goods and tell you that I'm something that I'm not. And a little bit more about me and my background. I'm a former prosecutor. So as a former prosecutor, it was very similar to what you want your judges to do. As a prosecutor, on one side of it, I was advising elected officials on issues such as zoning, public records, open meetings. I could give ethics opinions to elected officials. And, those are things that as a prosecutor, you want somebody that's going to apply the law. And on the criminal side, we prosecuted a couple of bad trustees. We prosecuted a corrupt county sheriff and worked on some other cases. And you want someone there, in my view, that's going to follow the law. We've also seen, in addition to the judges, we've seen some prosecutors, particularly in the last Biden DOJ, go after the president and some other folks, and you certainly can question. But that's an awesome power and responsibility to take someone's liberty, to take someone's property, and potentially imprison them, ruin their life. And it's the same principles that should guide a judge, should guide a prosecutor. So that was my first opportunity to do that. And I'm happy to say that I feel like I did that job well. And beyond that, and Justice Hawkins mentioned this a little bit, I believe very firmly in public service. And it's the reason I've continued. I graduated and near the top of my class. I could have gone and done whatever really I wanted, but I chose very early on to be involved in public service and help people and do the kind of things that help the little person in my mind. And I do that because that's what I learned from my parents. That's what I learned from my family. My grandmother and grandfather both were first, second generation Americans. World War II breaks out. The next day, my grandfather joins the Army Air Corps. My grandmother joins the Cadet Nursing Corps. They end up meeting, getting married, come back to Columbus, which was his hometown. So, right there, we have got two of my grandparents were involved in World War II. Both of my parents were actually deputy sheriffs. And that's who I learned, particularly from my mother, the idea that you have to have service. You have to believe in public service. And you have to put others above yourself. Where they actually met, and I think this is a funny story, so I hope you'll think it's funny too, is that they were both becoming deputy sheriffs. And if you know anything about peace officers training, is part of your training is arrest and control. Sometimes you got to put somebody in a place that they don't want to be, like the back of the cruiser, to take them to jail. So you have to learn how to put people in holds and cuff people and whatnot. Well, for reasons of providence, both of my parents were partnered up in defensive tactics. My mom tells the story that she didn't like my father very much. He was a high school dropout. He was a little bit of a, let's say, like an earthy person. He was just kind of a raw guy and a guy of the streets. She did not like him, but they get partnered up together. And I guess when you spend weeks upon weeks getting sweaty, pinning each other on the ground, putting each other against the wall, cuffing each other, you fall in love, because that's what happened to my parents. So through roughing each other up, they fell in love and had, later got married, had me, had my brother. But, even after she was done being a deputy sheriff and my father went on to have a small business, they were still active in the community, active in our church. My mom was my den leader, all that sort of stuff. And that's the sort of thing that I gave back. And when I had an opportunity to choose a career, I wanted to do public service because that's what my parents did, that's what my grandparents did, and that's what I firmly believe in. And I think, moreover, that's the kind of thing that you want in your judges, that are going to put other people above themselves. Because as Justice Hawkins mentioned, sometimes the right thing to do in the case is not the thing that you want. You wish it were different, you wish the outcome were different, but you still have to put what is right above what you want. So I appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself and talk about my campaign, and happy to take any questions. So get Andrew King.
Great, thank you. Okay, please line up on the microphone there if you have questions. Andrew, I do have one question for you. And because I don't have a legal background, it makes it more difficult to make a decision and as many of us in the audience, makes it more difficult to make a decision based on what you tell us on your judicial philosophy. We may hear it, we may like it, we may think it makes sense to us. I'd like to ask you a couple political questions, or at least a political question, because I know there's rules you have to follow, so I'm not going to get offended if you just don't answer my question. But I'm curious about sort of a two-part question here. First off, what's your campaign made of? Like, what are you doing to win this race? Why do you think you can win? There's a competitive four-person race. From my first glance, all four qualified candidates. How is it you're going to be the guy that wins this race? And what is it that makes you the best candidate, considering I know that there's rules that he can and can't talk about other candidates, but what is it that makes you the person that's going to be the best person for us in this race and for this seat in the Supreme Court?
Sure. Well, I appreciate the question. So first and foremost, I think, like I said, you want a constitutional conservative on the court, and that's me. Secondarily, and the first time I met Shannon was about a year ago, because Gary Cates pointed this out to me. The first ORP meeting, the Ohio Republican Party meeting of this cycle, was last January. I was the only candidate for Supreme Court to be at that meeting and address folks. I've been in this race from the beginning. There's been, I think, 6 or 7 people total in this race, but I've been here. I've been committed from the beginning. I've traveled the state, went to all 88 counties last year, went to a number of events, like 50-some Lincoln dinners, and it's not just to rack up the numbers, but it's to be in those counties, understand what folks care about, and understand their issues, and take questions, because a lot of times folks don't get a chance to talk to statewide candidates. For example, I showed up at the Lawrence County Fair, and they said, I've never had a Supreme Court justice come to the fair. So, I mean, those are the kind of things that I think is important that you get out there. You don't want judges in ivory towers. You don't want us to not be involved in the community. So that's been a big part of it for me, is getting out and about. You know, the other thing that I would just sort of share with you generally is that as a Court of Appeals judge, what we do is very similar to what the Ohio Supreme Court does. People come to us, ask us to decide very typically legal questions and rule on those and give guidance to the lower courts. I've got 15 counties that look to me for guidance. For the Supreme Court, it's all 88 counties. So, you know, from that standpoint, it's a job that I'm doing now and can easily step into and step up. I mean, I think the other thing, just sort of big picture, is I didn't necessarily go into it tonight. You certainly can look up my background. I've had broad experience, both in criminal, civil, state, federal, and working in private, working in government. And in front of the Supreme Court, anything can come in front of you. I mean, we get a lot of that at the Court of Appeals. You know, one day it could be like a cow running at large. The next day it's a multi-million-dollar trust case. The day after that it's a murder case. And these all just sort of happen, boom, boom. So having that broad experience as an attorney has helped me tremendously in doing that. You know, as far as what else would set me apart from the other folks is, you know, I've been a lifelong Republican. As I said, I was involved in Federal Society, but I was involved in my local party. I was on my executive committee at one point, and I was involved in helping candidates run for office, put their signs up, do all that kind of stuff. So long before becoming a judge, I was trying to help Republicans get elected. And I'm proud to say that I've only ever worked for Republican elected officials. So I worked for a Republican Court of Appeals judge, prosecutor, Frank LaRose, and Dave Yost. And I think that is important, that you choose to work for Republicans and carry out Republican policies, and you don't choose to go work for Democrats. So for me, I think that's another important distinction. So
the question is, having the government forcing you to have a license to carry a concealed weapon, do you feel that's against our Second Amendment right in the Constitution?
So yes, I mean, I think that Ohio's fixed a lot of that, right, with constitutional carry. I mean, it's not 100%, but so yes, and if you want, I can even.
Go ahead.
I was asked this the other night. So while I've been on the 5th District, I had a Second Amendment argument in front of us. We had a gentleman carry a firearm into a Class D liquor establishment that was not a CHL holder. I wrote the decision in a 2-1 case saying that the Constitution, based on what Justice Thomas said in the Bruin case, means that person should be entitled to carry their firearm. So I believe that. I've put that in an opinion, and I've explained the history and tradition of that, and that's sort of my view on it from a legal standpoint.
Hey, Andy. So I have 2 quick questions for you. First of all, can you say one nice thing about all your opponents? And second, what's your favorite canon of construction?
So favorite canon of construction. I would say probably the canon against absurdity and trying to get to an absurd result. I mean, it's not an often used canon, but I mean, sometimes, and you've gone to a lawyer, right? The lawyer can sort of tell you that, yes, a cat is a cow. And you're like, there's no way that can make sense. And that's sort of what that canon's meant, is to stop the lawyer brain from taking you into some ridiculous area. So that's a good one. As far as saying something nice, I mean, that's actually pretty easy, because 3 of us are Court of Appeals judges. And we all started as Court of Appeal judges about the same time. One person was appointed and then elected, and then 2 of us were elected in the same year. So all 3 of us stood for election in the same year. So one of them was in my new judge training, and then we see each other at conferences. So, I personally like both of them, and hang out with him at conferences, so I've got nothing bad to say about him. The other one, I worked for her father, so I didn't actually know her until she ran this time. So I enjoyed working for her father, and it's been nice getting to know her on the trail. So.
Everyone, Judge Andrew King running for Supreme Court. Thank you, Judge. Appreciate it. Thank you for being here.